Hey, what's up, everyone? Cameron here again with Car Audio Now. And today I'm excited. I'm going to be giving you a first look at Sony's brand new Mobile ES automotive amplifiers. The Mobile ES lineup was introduced in 2021. It's their flagship automotive audio products tailored towards the enthusiast. So these are high performance, high output products, not an entry level series. And we've been covering this lineup as they've been released, and as they've released new products and additional products as a part of this lineup, dating back to the first launch last year in 2021 when they launched with a series of coaxial and component speakers along with a 10-inch subwoofer. You can read some of the related reviews and articles in the descriptions below. They also added a really nice touchscreen head unit to the lineup towards the end of last year in 2021. It's the 9500ES. We reviewed that too, and I've linked that here as well. So they've been continuing to add to new products to the Mobile ES lineup as it as time goes on. The latest addition to the lineup is three new amplifiers and a pair of 12-inch subwoofers. And today I'm going to give you a close-up of the amplifiers. The mono block that you see right here, the XM-1ES, the 4-channel, which is the XM-4ES. These are the ones that I have on my bench. There's also a 5-channel that's a part of this lineup as well, but I don't have that available to unbox right now. But this review is still really relevant to the folks who are looking at that 5-channel XM-5ES. They share all the same technology. So in this review, I'm going to unbox these two amplifiers so that you can see exactly what's going on here and walk you through their key features, including some of the control panel functionality, the terminal design, so on and so forth. And if you like reviews like this, be sure to do us a favor and subscribe using the link below. So let's start out by talking about what you see in front of you here. On the left, you have the XM-1ES, which is a 600 watt output amplifier at 4 ohms or a 1,000 watt output at 2 ohms. It's obviously designed for subwoofers and comes with a dedicated control knob, a volume control knob for controlling your subwoofer level. And then on the right here, you have the XM-4ES, which is a 4-channel amplifier. It puts out 100 watts RMS per channel at 4 ohms, so times 4 channels, or 165 watts per channel at 2 ohms. You also have the option to bridge those 4 channels into 2 and produce 2 channels times 330 watts outputs at 4 ohms. The bridge is only at 4 ohms if you wanted to do that as well. And then the 5-channel, which is obviously, again, not here on my bench right now, but that puts out it's kind of a combination of the 4-channel and the mono block with a few differences, but it basically puts out, the 5-channel puts out 100 watts times 4 channels plus 450 watts RMS, that dedicated 450 watt channel at 4 ohms. Or if you run it at 2 ohms, you can do 165 watts for times 4 channels plus 750 watts. And again, that's at 2 ohms. So it's similar to the 4-channel too, where you can also bridge those 4 channels to produce 330 watts RMS times 2 at 4 ohms, plus that dedicated 450 or 750 watt channel, depending on the resistance that you're running on that channel as well to power your subwoofer. I did an in-depth write-up of these as well, so if you'd like to see the specs, but that may have sounded like a bunch of gibberish, but solid specs when it comes to the power output, and more importantly, these are really well designed to work well with the various other components in the Mobile ES lineup. So, for example, if you wanted to pair these amps up with a 6x9 or 6.5-inch speaker on the Mobile ES lineup, the Mobile ES speakers handle between 90 and 110 watts RMS, which is about as perfect matchup as it gets to the 4-channel here and that 5-channel output, which puts out 100 watts RMS at 4 ohms. And similarly, if you choose their 10-inch or one of their 12-inch subs, which are rated at 450 and 500 watts RMS at 4 ohms. They're also they're very well aligned with the 5-channel amp, which has a 450 watt output, and the mono block's 600 watt 600 watt output at 4 ohms, right? So like a lot of manufacturers who introduce a single lineup, they're very well matched and designed to work together as one cohesive system. Their specs are very well aligned. If you want to get mobile ES speakers, I'd recommend getting the amplifiers and the speakers. It's less to worry about in terms of tuning and power. They're well aligned. The amplifiers are also what's called high resolution audio compatible, which just means that they'll play a higher bit depth than traditional CDs. It might be important for some folks, but the average Joe probably doesn't mean too much. So next, let me pull these amplifiers out of the box here and give you a close-up of what they come with, what they look like, and some of the hardware and components, and just start to go in general through some of the key features. Okay, cool. So I've pulled out both of these amplifiers for you now, and the first thing that you'll probably notice or might be interested in hearing about is their size. They're both, this whole series is Class D. So like most Class D amplifiers, they're a little more compact. The monoblock and the 4-channel are on the same platform. So they're about 10.5 inches by 8.5 inches by about 2.5 inches tall, roughly. And again, the 4-channel and the monoblock are the same. The 5-channel is probably within about another inch to 2 inches of this. It's a little longer. Sony uses an aluminum case, which is relatively standard. It's a standard frame material for amplifiers. It's great for heat dissipation. But they feel really solid too, the entire casing. Sony says it has a 1.2 millimeter thick bottom plate. So that's referring to kind of the bottom here. They make a point to call this out, that this particular bottom plate is thick because it's also resonance dampening or damping, excuse me. My best guess here is that by increasing the thickness of the frame and the bottom plate, it'll reduce just in general the overall impact of vibrations or frequencies that those vibrations might have. It might have an impact on the performance or the output of the amplifier. It might cause vibrations and so on and so forth. So by increasing the thickness of the bottom plate, they're by nature adding additional damping into the design of these amplifiers. You can also see these two screws, these Allen screws, which hold on a protective panel. Underneath those is where you'll find all the various controls that I'll get into. And then the bottom here is where you'll find all of the terminals and the signal inputs and outputs. These amplifiers don't have a built-in DSP or software that'll allow you to tune them via an app like Sony's XM-GS6 DSP, which we also reviewed a little while back. But unlike that 6-channel, the GS6 DSP amplifier, these do have a lot more variety in terms of the configurations that they support via the tuning, the input and output configurations compared to that DSP amplifier. And whether you're using one signal input to power the whole system, 2 signals, for example, front and rear, or you want to pass a signal through to other amplifiers, so on. These amplifiers are capable of doing that. They also accept high-level inputs. If you didn't have a preamp or low voltage input, the only downside to this is that the inputs have to be an RCA, whether it's a high level input or a preamp, 4 volts, 5 volt input. So you basically need some RCA adapters here to wire your high level inputs if you wanted to use your OEM speaker signal on these amps. I'll get into that a little bit more in detail in a moment. In particular, the 4-channel and the configurations on that amplifier. So let me go ahead and pop off the cover on this 4-channel and start to show you what the control panel looks like and the various configuration options. They give you an Allen with each amp, which is always nice to have, keep in your glove box or something. If you need to tune it, it's always nice to have that ability to go in and tune your amp on the road. So I always like to keep those Allen wrenches somewhere that's handy. So let me go ahead and pull this off and give you a look at the control panel. All right, so let's pull off the panel on this 4-channel. I think that it makes more sense to go through the 4-channel because, with the exception of like a subsonic filter. The 4-channel here has everything and more than the monoblock does, and it's very similar to what you'd see on the 5-channel, with the exception of that, again, that subsonic filter for the dedicated subwoofer output channel. And this might look intimidating for someone who rarely looks at an amplifier control panel, but it's not too difficult once you know what some of the core components are. I'm going to try to keep it light here relatively, though, and cover off on some of the core things that I think improve the overall quality and functionality of the amplifier. So sorry if I breeze through some of this stuff. And I think the expectation here is that you in general, things like gains, what a high pass and low pass filter is, what range and just in general filters are. I'm going to breeze through some of these. Before I get into the control panel, I figured it'd be important to call out that these amplifiers have an input voltage selection. I kind of mentioned this before, the difference between a high voltage and a low voltage input. You can actually select down on the bottom here on the far left, and this is below the control panel, if you're using a low or a high input voltage input. So this is pretty nice. The low voltage inputs are typically between 2 volts and 5 volts is pretty standard. You can either use that type of low voltage signal, which is basically what would come out of the back of a aftermarket head unit, or out of like a high-low converter, or a line input converter. You just basically plug them in. Right here, you flip to the low voltage, and you're done. You plug your RCAs in, or you can also use high voltage, aka basically cutting your speaker wire in your car if you didn't want to replace your head unit, and then using the existing speaker wire as your signal. And the important thing to note here is that you would need an RCA adapter. I kind of mentioned this before. You can't literally plug your speaker wire into here. You can see there's no spot for that. So you need to buy RCA adapters, and then you would adapt your speaker wire into an RCA. It's a small added step, but it's nice to have that feature. And then you would just select the high input voltage, and then now this amplifier is compatible with using your existing vehicle's high voltage speaker signal wire. Cool. And now for the good stuff, looking at the panel on the left, starting on the left, you have what's called an amp turn on selector. Remote on the left hand side here is going to use the standard 12 volt as the signal to turn this amplifier on. And then the signal here on the right, if you flip it to the right, is actually going to use the speaker signal, which will take, basically, if there's a signal that comes in here in one of the inputs, it'll tell the amplifier to turn on. And I like having this option here in case you don't or can't run a 12 volt signal wire to the amplifier. As long as you have your constant power, which is the power that you hook up to ground and your battery, it'll turn on as soon as it sources or senses a signal. And then you get into the input mode here and the line out mode. So I think that this is one of the nice benefits of these amplifiers. Surprisingly, despite the various configurations of this panel, though, Sony did a pretty good job at organizing them and labeling them to simplify your installation. I know it might look daunting, and rather than look at the amplifier, I'm going to go through these, and I'm going to show some visuals, some visual aids to explain this one a little more. So by using the combination of the input and output line out modes here, there's a lot of flexibility that these amps offer. Clean signal can be pretty tough to find in some vehicles. You may only have a front signal, a rear signal. You might have to sum multiple signals in order to get an output signal with a full frequency range for like a 6.5-inch component. So let's talk about the options here. On the input mode here, you have the 1 through 4 selection. That's the furthest on the left. This means that you'll use all 4 of the RCA channel inputs. Input 1 will match the output on channel 1, and input 2 will match the channel 2, right, and so on. The next one is one. So one will actually pull a mono signal from the signal input, and then it will push an identical mono output to all four channels. And I think that this particular option is good for kind of higher end systems that you're looking to replace, like on a Cadillac or something like that with a 16 to 32 speaker system. You can use the amplifiers as sort of a quadrant where the signal in is simply like the front right or the front left or the rear right, rear left, and then power, all of the speakers in that quadrant. So like in a 16 speaker system, you would use a mono and it'd be the same sort of signal for that entire quadrant, right? Pretty cool. You have the next one here, which is 1 to 2, which basically will take the input 1 signal and output it to channels 1 and 3. Take the input 2 signal and output it to channels 2 and 4. So essentially it's taking a stereo input left and right and then multiplying or extending it to the appropriate left and right channels, channel outputs on the amp. You basically only need input 1 and 2 though in order to power all 4 channels, which is nice. You don't need all 4 inputs. And then there's the last section here, which is I think the most interesting of the bunch to me, because it'll sum the frequencies from inputs 1 and 3, and then output the combined frequency for channel outputs 1 and 3, right? So, and then it'll do the same for 2 and 4. So let's talk about why you might need this, though. Let's say you have a 3.5-inch mid-range speaker like the dash of the new Broncos have, and then a 5.25-inch in the Broncos kick panel, for example. And then you want to replace those two with a 6.5-inch component with your 6.5-inch woofer in the kick panel and then the tweeter in the dash instead of that 3.5. In this use case, you'll probably want to use the high voltage, which means you will take the actual speaker wire, and then you'll use the factory speaker wire as your signal. You're going to take the signal from the 3.5-inch that's in that Bronco, along with the 5.25-inch, and combine them to use them for your 6.5-inch component, your aftermarket speakers. So this option is good for that. It'll sum the frequencies from those two, and then you can utilize the filters downstream, which I'll get into in a little bit, to kind of box them in and redefine how what the frequency range looks like for your output. The possibilities are really endless. I think the summing feature in general is one of the key features that that is worth calling out on these amplifiers. The possibilities are really endless. And then to the next of the input mode, you have the line out mode, which essentially will take your input signal and then it'll pass it through to another amplifier so that you don't have to run multiple signal wires throughout your vehicle to power your amps. So if you have a single input, that's basically a comprehensive signal that has all the lows through the highs that you need for your system. You can use this. You can basically use this to daisy chain through multiple amplifiers with one signal. It's really powerful if it's used properly, and it really limits some of the wiring that goes into powering these, or the signal wiring, at least RCAs that you run to these amplifiers from maybe the front of the vehicle to the back. Instead of running 4 or 8, you run 2. It's also worth noting that neither the input mode or the filters down here have an impact on the line out, which is right here. This is the line out. Really the only thing that impacts this line out is this selection, and there's 3 options you have on the left: through, which takes the input from 1 and 2 here and passes it through untouched; stereo, which is the middle one here. This will take and sum the frequencies. Another example of summing. It'll take and sum the frequencies from 1 and 3 along with the inputs 2 and 4. So it sums those two, 1 and 3, 2 and 4, and then passes them through as a left and right or 2 channels. And then finally you have all, which basically will sum all of the inputs. And this is cool too. You can take and sum all of the inputs and pass them through line 1 and 2. So if you have all 4 inputs that create that comprehensive full range of frequencies. When summed, you can pass that entire summed signal out in this through with this while the line out mode is selected at all. I really like this summing feature because it gives you the ability to tweak or modify the signal that you're going to pass to the next amplifier. It's not just a basic through signal. If you wanted to pass a signal on to another 4-channel, you'd probably use either the through or the stereo. If you were powering similar speakers, or if you wanted to power something more powerful and downstream, or maybe even just a mono block, right? You can pass a summed mono output to another amp, or even a DSP if you wanted to filter it in line. It's just really flexible. Like I said earlier, I'd only elaborate on some of the important stuff, and I really think that this is one that's worth noting. In particular, the summing capabilities that it has with a line output. I just don't see that too often. Moving on to the next set of controls, you can see these are duplicated here. One for channels 1 and 2, which aligns with this here. Then 1, 4, 3, and 4, which powers these two speaker outputs here. So basically, I can just focus on one because they're both the same. Filters, starting with filters are standard on pretty much all amplifiers, unless it's like a DSP amplifier from like JL, or I've tested out some marine amplifiers from Fusion, their Apollo series, where you actually don't have anything. But in general, these filters are standard on amplifiers, or they're offloaded into settings on an app, and then you load up the configurations of Bluetooth. But anyhow, depending on what type of speaker you're powering, you'll select off, high power, or low power. High pass or low pass. The one that's worth calling out here is band pass. Not all amplifiers have band pass. It's not as common. This basically will allow you to preset the two ranges, the high pass and the low pass, to set the floor and the ceiling of your frequencies. This is great for mid-range speakers in particular. So if I were to select band pass here, I would be able to set the high pass and the low pass, and that would basically create my boundaries, instead of a high pass which would only pass the higher end of the spectrum, or a low pass which would only pass kind of the lower end of the spectrum. You can box them in with this band pass, which is kind of cool. To the right of the filter, you have range. Range is also pretty cool and less common feature in my opinion, because it gives you the control over the floor and ceiling frequencies, regardless of whether or not you're using band pass. You could select high pass or low pass, and then you can still actually set the boundaries to have much more control within the high pass and the low pass settings. So and you can see this here. So if I were to select a range of 50 to 500 hertz, the numbers that indicate this range now align with what's on the high pass and the low pass here. They are indicated as the non-white background. So you can see this 550 through 500 doesn't have a white background. The top row here is what aligns, and that's what these will operate within. The high pass and the low pass will operate within 50 to 500 on both of these. So you'll set the low and the high. You can almost create a separate band pass, right? And then similarly, 500 to 5K hertz. Now you see this white background. You see that represented on the second row down here, highlighted with a white background. And then now these two operate within those two frequency ranges. So pretty cool. Another cool feature that's worth calling out, again, very flexible. And then finally, you have your input sensor, which is your gain. This is very standard. I won't get into detail. There's 1,000 videos that tell you what gains do. It's not volume though, and I'll call that out. So before I wrap up, there's a couple quick features worth noting on these amplifiers that you can't necessarily see. Most importantly, Sony calls out some of the internal components of these amplifiers, like the types of conductors and OFC wires that are used, along with a power supply block and DC converter. all designed to minimize interference. I think I stated this. These aren't entry-level amplifiers, so anything that they add, they're going to add in some higher quality components to help minimize interference and feedback. These are, of course, important and good to see in a high quality amplifier because feedback, buzzing, other interference can be a huge drag. They don't call out any specific features that will eliminate interference from, let's say, a less than ideal ground, inconsistent voltage across your system, the typical things that cause like whining and stuff. Some other amplifier manufacturers do have those types of, eliminating features, interference eliminating features. These don't. You still need to do your due diligence there during your installation. They also feature some nice hardware, that comes with these hex screws for these terminals. These are all stainless, which is nice to see. Common on higher end amplifiers, but again, nice to see. So yeah, overall, I was really impressed with these, though. I really like the look of these amplifiers, the specs. They're very powerful. They're very competitive. And then what really stands out to me is really the configuration options for inputs, outputs, and line outputs, right? And those are kind of what stood out to me. The control that you have directly on the amplifier in terms of setting the upper and the lower thresholds of the frequencies and the output is really powerful on these. It's a really nice add. You could probably do some, if not all of this, via an external DSP too, if you wanted to, or even using something like Sony's XAV9500ES. That's their mobile ES head unit with its parametric EQ and their advanced crossover control interface. But it's great to hard set these either way for protecting your system. And it gives you a lot of flexibility if you don't have those types of tools, or if you don't want to use them, you don't want to spend the money for them. So overall, really excited to put these in to a system and really dial it in. But that's all I had for today. If you like this video, do me a huge favor and hit the subscribe below. It'll really help us out. Thanks.